So here we are at the mash tun at Cardew, and this is where we convert the starch, which is inside the malt, into the sugars, which are going to be fermented later on in the process. So basically up here we have the grist bin, which contains the malt, and when we start to mash, it comes down here and meets with the hot water coming from the heating tank. And in this part here, called the mashing machine, it's mixed together so that the starch gelatinizes and allows the enzymes within the malt to attack that starch, converting it into fermentable sugars. Now, the temperature we do this at is very important, because too hot and we would start to destroy the enzymes and they would not be able to convert the starch into sugar. Too cold and we won't gelatinize the starch, allowing those enzymes to attack it. So we use a temperature of 64 degrees, which is a compromise temperature, but it gives us the best of both worlds. We'll now go over here and see what's happening inside the mash tun. So once the grist and the water has been mixed together, it flows into the mash tun here and forms a bed, and from that the sugary liquid, which we call wort, starts to drain through the perforated floor. Later on, we need to rinse those sugars from the malt, and we use hotter and hotter water sparging through the bed to drain out and rinse out those sugars. Those sugars then make their way to a vessel called an underback prior to being cooled, ready for fermentation. One of the things we do at Cardew, which is a bit different from some other distilleries, is we mash very, very gently. The arms are raised slightly higher, the knives go through the malt and travel very, very gently around the mash tun. And what this means is we end up with a very clear wort, a very pure wort, and we need that later on to make sure we make our green grassy type character. When the sugar, or wort as we call it, is draining from the mash tun, it doesn't go straight to the washback. It comes to a vessel called the underback, which acts as a sort of buffer vessel. It also helps to balance the mash tun. So if the drainage is a bit slow, you may be able to use this to just lift the bed slightly and get the drainage to be at its maximum. So it's a kind of unsung hero. It plays its part.
Here we are in the mash house at Royal Lochnagar, and right away you'll note that this is a traditional mash tun. There's not a lot of these in the business nowadays, and this is quite unusual, and it's quite unusual to have actually mash tun and worms as we have. This is quite challenging. They have the new louter gear which you can play tunes with. We are quite awkward with this, if you like. We can't do a lot with this. If the malted barley is challenging, and sometimes there's very good reasons why it's challenging, it can be a bad harvest, it can be hard to process through the maltings, but the bottom line is, if it's challenging, there's not a lot we can do with this mash tun. Whereas with a louter gear, you can backstir, you can raise and lower the rakes and so on and so forth, or the knife rather. But with this, all you can really do is put on the rakes, and if you put on the rakes, you would spin them round a lot, you're going to create cloudy worts. Now that's one of the things that we're trying hard not to do. We want to have clear worts, so we get this light character.
So this is the mash tun. This is the first stage of the malt whisky making process at the distillery. So we've received our malted barley, we mill it, and once we've milled it, we put it into this mash tun and mix it with water. What we're doing here is the barley is full of starch, and we're adding water to it to allow a reaction to take place which converts it into sugar. The sugar, being readily soluble in water, then drains through a sieve plate at the bottom. So we remove all the solubles within the water, and we leave behind the solids that we no longer require for the process. So when you're mashing, although mashing possibly doesn't directly affect the final spirit character, it is a very key part to the process. If we don't get it right now, we can't correct it later on. At Oban, we want a very clear wort. The reason you want a clear wort, when you have a clear wort, which means very few solids have followed the sugary liquid through, that allows for lighter spirits. The spirit character of Oban is fruity. It has some hints of orange peel and some citrus in it. It also has some ginger, it goes very well with ginger. It's the clear wort that's helping that happen. If you run a faster mash and you drain the liquid through the grist quicker, what you create is what's called a cloudy wort, just simply entrained more solids in it. This lends itself really well to making good whiskies that make nutty and spicy flavours. However, those aren't the flavours that we require at Oban. So, Oban Distillery has been about since 1794. The footprint of the distillery has not changed very much since the late 1800s. That includes the mash tun. The mash tun is as traditional as you will possibly ever see. The only real innovation it's had recently is to have a roof put on it and a lid. Inside, if you look inside, there's no loutering arm, there's no special equipment. Simply what we do here is we mash and leave it alone, and that's all we do. We just let the water drain through until it's ready. In the mash tun, we've taken malted barley, which we've milled, and we're mixing it with hot water. And that essentially is what the mash is. The mash is the mixed solution that we produce. During the process of the water being added to this malted barley, we're converting starch, which is insoluble, into sugar, which readily gets dissolved within the water. It's this rich sugary liquid that becomes known as wort. The rich sugary liquid of wort is then drained from the bottom of the mash tun continuously and is passed via a cooler into the washbacks where we'll start making the alcohol. To get the most sugar extracted, we add the water at 3 levels. Initially we start at 63.5 degrees. The reason we do this is a good balance between allowing the starch to break into sugar while at the same rate dissolving it quickly. After some time of running what we call the first water, we then up the temperature. Again, it's a balance between two things. We go up to somewhere in the 70s, the mid to high 70s. 77 degrees about right. At this kind of stage, this is now just converting the final starches into sugars, while at the same time readily dissolving them into the water. We then allow this to run through. Although not as sugary as the first application we have, it's still sugary enough to go through into the process. At the end, there is some residual starch left over. We really up the temperature over 80 degrees now, possibly all the way up to 83, 85. That's simply to strip out and convert the final starch and dissolve it in water. Now, that final water doesn't carry enough sugar to carry on through into fermentation. It'll actually dilute the process. So we hold that back, and next time that we come to mash, we'll use that as the first water. Therefore, we've recovered all the sugar out of the malt.